Governments like to say that they work for the economic well-being of the people. They always talk about prosperity, stability, and development plans. But if you look closely at history, a darker picture appears. Throughout history, governments have used many hidden financial tricks to keep people poor while keeping wealth and power in their own hands. The most surprising part is that none of these tricks are actually new. They are old tricks that returned again and again over the centuries under different methods and new names. But the goal has always stayed the same: to increase their own wealth and make the majority of people dependent on them. Let's start with the oldest and simplest trick of all: inflation, something all of you already know. When a government spends more money than it collects through taxes, it has two choices. Either it accepts the truth and directly raises taxes, which is politically the most dangerous option, or it quietly lowers the value of money and makes people pay its debts through inflation without them fully realizing it. The best example of this is Rome. In the 3rd century AD, Roman emperors faced rising military expenses and reduced the amount of silver inside the denarius coin, making the currency less valuable. At one time, a coin was made completely from pure silver. Over time, copper was mixed into it, and the coins became covered with only a thin layer of silver. Even though emperors claimed that nothing had changed, ordinary people paid the price. Inflation exploded, savings disappeared, and people's income could no longer cover their daily needs. This was a silent form of taxation taken from the people. The same method used by empires in the past survived into the modern age through central banks. The Middle Ages brought another version of this game: forced lending. Kings in France, Spain, and England forced guilds and wealthy merchants to lend money to the royal families. Of course, the rich were not willing to lend money to the crown, but refusing to do so could mean fines, confiscation of property, or even worse punishments. Sometimes kings promised to repay the loans with interest, but repayments were often delayed, paid back with weak currency, or never returned at all. Governments running royal palaces and expensive wars always placed their own survival above repaying merchants. The trick here was bullying disguised as patriotism or duty. Kings ruled for centuries using this method. But by the 17th century, the financial system itself became a tool of taxation. In 1694, England created the Bank of England. Of course, this was not done for charity. The government needed money to fight France. Wealthy families and investors bought government bonds. In return, the king guaranteed interest payments funded by taxes. At first, this agreement looked fair. But think about who actually paid those taxes. Ordinary people did. Everyday purchases such as beer, cloth, and market goods became part of the financing system through taxes collected from the public. The rich earned guaranteed interest by lending money to the government. The poor paid more taxes every time they bought something in order to finance those interest payments. This was a transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich, hidden under the label of national finance. Governments strengthened this system, and it still exists today. Lending money to governments continued to be seen as a safe investment for the wealthy, while the returns were guaranteed through the labor and consumption of ordinary people. In the modern world, these tricks appear everywhere. Look at government spending and national debt. Governments collect huge debts by selling bonds to investors, banks, and foreign states. Politicians tell the public that this spending is for infrastructure, jobs, or social benefits. But a large part of the money often flows to defense contractors, corporate subsidies, and bailout programs. When the bill arrives, governments usually raise taxes, reduce the value of money through inflation, or cut social support instead of reducing spending for the upper class. The trick is this: debt is presented as something for the people, but the burden of repayment is placed on the people themselves. The profits still go to bondholders. Then there are bailout programs. During the 2008 financial crisis, banks took irresponsible risks, turned unpaid mortgages into financial products, and pushed the global economy close to collapse. Who paid the price? Ordinary taxpayers through massive government bailouts. And who benefited afterward? The same banks, which became even larger and more powerful than before. The trick was obvious: keep the profits private and spread the losses across society. people were told that it was necessary to save the system. The way governments manage pension systems is another example of illusion. For decades, people in America, Britain, and Europe paid into state pension systems believing they would receive support after retirement. But governments often do not truly save this money. They spend it immediately and replace it with promises. The idea is that future taxpayers will cover the cost later. In reality, this is a type of generational Ponzi system wrapped in official language. It works only until demographics change, populations grow older, and the system becomes unsustainable. When that moment arrives, governments reform the system. Usually this means cutting benefits, increasing the retirement age, or reducing the real value of payments through inflation. Notice the pattern. At every stage, the trick depends on perception. Inflation becomes growth. Forced lending becomes civic duty. National debt becomes investment. Bailouts become stability measures. Pension cuts become structural reform. Language hides the truth. Wealth flows from the majority to the minority, from the bottom to the top. And history shows that this trick has worked for centuries. Why? Because most people do not know economic history, do not research it, and notice the trap only when it is too late. In the last decade, these tricks became even more complex. Take quantitative easing, a concept many people had never heard before. Central banks created trillions of dollars out of nothing to stabilize markets. They bought government bonds and mortgage-backed securities. Politicians and bankers said these actions were necessary to prevent economic collapse. And for the financial system, they worked. Asset prices rose rapidly. Stocks, real estate, and bonds all increased sharply. But who owns most of these assets? Wealthy people. For households without major investments, the gains remained very small, while rising living costs and distorted markets placed heavy pressure on ordinary families. The trick was this: money creation mainly benefited those at the top of the financial system, while ordinary households were left with inflation and inequality. Another modern trick is hidden taxation. Instead of directly raising income taxes, governments use invisible channels, such as VAT taxes, fuel taxes, and especially inflation. When prices rise faster than incomes, the difference becomes a hidden tax on savings and purchasing power. Governments like inflation because it reduces the real value of debt, but for citizens it slowly destroys financial freedom. You may feel richer because your salary increased, but if costs rise faster than your income, you are actually losing wealth. This is not a flaw in the system. It is part of the system itself. Inflation is not simply a random economic event. It is one of the most consistent tricks governments use to pass the cost of their spending onto the public, without openly admitting it. Regulatory capture is another part of this picture. On the surface, regulations are meant to protect the public. Financial rules, safety standards, and consumer rights. But history repeatedly shows that powerful industries slowly gain influence over the very authorities that are supposed to regulate them. In the 19th century, it was the railroads. In the 20th century, oil companies. And today, technology and finance. All of them shaped rules in ways that benefited themselves. This is the same dynamic shown on a smaller scale in Peaky Blinders. Instead of fighting fairly in the game, it is better to buy the referee. Governments use regulation to create the image of protection, while behind the scenes, the biggest companies create loopholes that reduce competition and increase profits. The public sees security. Insiders see profit. War financing is another old trick wearing a modern mask. During the First and Second World Wars, governments sold huge amounts of bonds and told citizens that buying them was patriotic. People believed they were supporting their countries, and they were. But these bonds also became safe and profitable investments for wealthy groups, supported by future taxes. In the 21st century, the mask is still the same. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were financed largely through debt, creating profits for defense contractors, banks, and bondholders, while ordinary taxpayers paid the bill. The trick is that wars are always presented as emergencies, but the financial burden remains for generations. Governments also use complexity itself as a financial trick. tax systems with thousands of pages, financial products too complicated even for experts, and budgets filled with hidden details and technical language create a confusing camouflage that makes it almost impossible for ordinary citizens to follow the real flow of money. If you cannot see the transfer of wealth, you cannot resist it. In ancient Rome, coins mixed with copper were visible proof of the trick. Today, the same trick is hidden inside long financial reports, unclear programs, and endless abbreviations. The method never changes. Make the system too complicated for the public to understand, and the transfer can continue unnoticed. Why is all of this so important today? Because these tricks are not disappearing. They are evolving. Inflation continues to destroy savings. Debt keeps increasing every year. New bailout programs become the normal response every time markets shake. While central banks continue manipulating the money supply, governments continue shifting costs onto the public in ways most people cannot fully understand. The result is a system designed to make people work harder while owning less, while the financial system itself grows stronger. History teaches us not only that these tricks exist, but that they always return in new forms. When Roman coins lost value, citizens suffered. When kings forced loans, merchants lost wealth. When modern states print money and expand debt, households carry the burden. The eras change, but the mechanism stays the same. The painful truth is that most people will never escape these tricks because they do not even realize the game exists. They see inflation as natural, taxes as unavoidable, and government bailouts as acts of help. Instead of learning economic history, they choose to believe what governments tell them. And this ignorance becomes the strongest trick of all. When society forgets the past, it loses the ability to recognize its repetition. That is why governments and elites prefer a society with weak financial knowledge and poor economic education. Financial education is resistance. Economic history is a weapon. If you understand the tricks, you become harder to manipulate. So what should we learn from all this? First, always look beyond the headlines. When governments announce stimulus packages, ask who benefits first and most. When inflation rises, remember that it is not always just bad luck, but often the result of deliberate policies. When new regulations appear, ask who wrote them and who benefits from them. Second, build lasting wealth outside these traps. Assets that can keep value even when money loses purchasing power. Third, never assume the system works for you simply because it claims to. Systems are designed to protect themselves, not necessarily to protect you. History does not repeat itself exactly, but if you do not understand it, it can crush you. The same system that kept Roman citizens and many societies poor still exists today inside the modern banking system, only dressed in modern language. The only difference is whether you recognize it in time. If this text gave you a new perspective, don't forget to subscribe. The answers are hidden inside history, and I will continue showing you where to look.